I never received it. That is all I said. 5 words, spoken just loud enough to slice through the clinking champagne flutes and the overpriced jazz quartet playing standards in the corner. Our managing director, Victor Ashford, a man who wears custom suits and carries the moral compass of a slot machine, had just raised his crystal to me, or more precisely, to Catherine, which is what he calls me when he is pretending to remember his analysts exist. To Catherine, he beamed, looking out at the crowd like a chairman addressing shareholders. She closed 3 major deals this quarter and earned herself that well-deserved $80,000 performance bonus. The best closer on the floor. Cheers. Applause followed. Laughter from the partners' table. Someone from M&A yelled something about bottle service being on me tonight. I did not clap. I did not raise my glass. I just looked up at Victor from across the private dining room, met his gaze, and said those 5 words. I never received it. And that is when the celebration died. It did not collapse exactly. It hemorrhaged slowly in expensive silence. The CFO, Leonard, who always smells like old money and antacids, twitched hard enough to nearly spill his scotch. The HR director, Priscilla, started coughing into her napkin like she had suddenly forgotten how to swallow oyster. Even the junior associate manning the coat check stopped sorting tickets and stared. Victor, to his credit, did not flinch. He just chuckled that hollow laugh he uses when regulators ask about our risk exposure. Ah, always so precise. Catherine, it is in the system. Compensation must have processed it already. You know how these quarterly payouts lag. I blinked once. I checked my account this morning. Nothing deposited, nothing pending, nothing at all. Priscilla made a noise halfway between a laugh and a gasp. I will have finance look into it first thing Monday, Victor said, his voice a shade too bright. Now come on. Tonight is about celebrating. You have earned this. I am sure I have, I said. I just want to know what exactly I am celebrating. And with that, I set my glass down, still full, and walked out of the private room. Left Victor standing there like a balance sheet with all the assets suddenly reclassified as liabilities. He kept smiling, but you could see the edges starting to crack. Listen, if you have made it this far into the story, do me a small favor. Hit that subscribe button and give this a like. 93% of you listen in silence, and I get it. You are running models in another window, pretending to be productive. But hey, it keeps this whole financial circus solvent, and my portfolio would really appreciate it. Anyway, I did not cry in the town car. I did not rage text from my apartment. I did not fire off a passive-aggressive email to the compensation committee at midnight. I just went home, poured myself a glass of wine that cost more than it should have, and opened my laptop. Then I started pulling the files. Because here is the thing. I was not confused. I was not even surprised. I was prepared. 5 months ago, I requested a copy of my original employment agreement for tax planning purposes. I said, legal sent it over without a second thought. I saved it in a folder titled Estate Planning Documents. That folder had 34 other files in it. Internal memos I was not supposed to have access to. Compensation committee minutes from 3 years of quarterly meetings. A PDF from 18 months ago titled Discretionary Bonus Allocation, Partner Review. A spreadsheet showing fund transfers that just happened to redirect $80,000 from the analyst bonus pool to executive supplemental compensation, approved by Victor himself. And a personal favorite. A screenshot of an encrypted Bloomberg chat where Leonard asked if it was acceptable to defer her Q4 payout to cover the Aspen retreat expenses. Defer. Aspen retreat. I could have laughed if I were not so completely finished with these people. See, I did not get where I am by being loud. I am not the one who dominates pitch meetings or leads client dinners with war stories. I am the one who builds the models, structures the deals, and makes the partners look brilliant, quietly, efficiently, without drama. And when people like Victor forget that quiet does not mean powerless, well, that is when portfolios start to implode. I sent one email before I went to sleep, just one. No attachments, no explanations. Just the subject line, Article 9.2, Formal Notice of Invocation. And to be clear, I drafted that clause myself 4 years ago, inserted it into my contract after watching too many senior analysts get handshakes and tombstones for deals I had structured. HR never scrutinized it. Legal skimmed it during a busy quarter. Victor signed it during a capital call while eating sushi on a conference call with LPs. Article 9.2. Failure to disperse performance compensation within 21 calendar days of confirmed deal closure entitles the employee to initiate proprietary methodology, protection protocols without further notice. They had all forgotten about it. I had not. And now I had just knocked over the first domino. Monday morning smelled like fear and burnt espresso. Not that anyone would admit it. On the surface, the office was its usual mahogany purgatory. People walked briskly in expensive shoes. Bloomberg terminals flickered with exaggerated importance. Somewhere down the trading floor, someone kept pretending to laugh at something a managing director said. But beneath the polished veneer, something had shifted. I could feel it. By 9:23 a.m., Priscilla from HR had already stopped by my desk twice under the guise of just checking in. Her Hermes scarf still had a wine stain from the party. She looked like she had not slept. "Hey, Catherine," she said. Too cheerful. So strange about the bonus situation. Probably just a wire transfer delay, right? International clearing can be slow. I did not even bother looking up from my Bloomberg terminal. "Sure," I said. "Probably." At 10:14 a.m., I got the email I had been waiting for. Subject line, Compensation Review, Urgent, from Margaret Holloway, General Counsel. She asked me to join a legal review meeting at 10:45 sharp. Small conference room. Just her and me. No need to bring anything, the email said. So I brought everything. The room smelled like leather furniture and liability. Margaret was already seated when I arrived, fingers pressed together like she was trying to physically contain her thoughts. She did not offer me coffee. She did not smile. She gestured to the chair across from her like I was there to discuss a margin call. She held a printed copy of my contract in her lap, pages slightly creased. One red tab marking page 11. I sat, placed my leather attaché on the table, waited. Margaret cleared her throat. "Catherine, have you ever exercised Article 9.2 before, Nome?" I said. "But the clause is valid. Signed, countersigned, notarized. You will find the backup in the contract archive. Document reference, Catherine-92A. She blinked. I continued. It was added as a condition of continued employment during the 2020 compensation restructuring. I drafted it myself, had it reviewed by outside counsel, and submitted it to legal for incorporation. Victor approved it over lunch on November 8th, said it sounded appropriately aggressive for someone in my position. Margaret looked down again, flipping to the marked page. She read the clause aloud slowly. Like each word was a warning she had failed to heed. Article 9.2. Failure to disperse performance compensation within 21 calendar days of confirmed deal closure entitles the employee to initiate proprietary methodology. Protection protocols without further notice. Her voice thinned as she reached the end. She looked up at me, visibly pale. "You are saying you invoked this Friday evening, I am, and those protocols." She hesitated. "They are not merely procedural, are they?" "They are comprehensive," I said calmly. Access restrictions on proprietary models. Licensing holds on valuation frameworks. Automatic revocation of methodology usage rights. Nothing irreversible yet. Her pen slipped from her fingers. And the documentation I nodded toward my attaché, protected under individual authorship until the compensation breach is legally remedied. Page 14 of the clause addendum. You will find it fully executed. She stared at me for a long moment, no longer attempting to hide the tension in her jaw. Victor mentioned the bonus at the party to be gracious. He assumed it had been dispersed. It had not. Have you verified with Treasury? I verified with my bank. I verified with payroll. I reviewed every deposit since September. I even pulled the wire transfer logs from our own clearing system. My bonus is not there. She stood and walked to the conference phone, dialed an internal extension. Get Victor in here immediately. We sat in silence for 5 minutes. I could hear the clock tick, the ventilation hum, Margaret's breathing accelerate like a traitor watching a position move against them. Victor burst in like he was arriving late to a board presentation. What is the crisis, he said. Slightly out of breath and still carrying a green juice from the executive lounge, Margaret stood and handed him the contract. No pleasantries, no preamble. Just you sign this. You activated this. He flipped pages with that same theatrical confidence he uses at investor meetings. Then he stopped. Read the clause. Blinked. Wait. This is enforceable, very. I said, I thought it was posturing, a negotiation placeholder. It is a contract provision. I said, and it has been triggered. Victor looked up, jaw tight. So what? You are restricting our models over a bonus. Margaret cut him off before I could. No, she is legally authorized to initiate protective actions on intellectual property she developed. That includes quite a lot. Victor, including our core valuation methodologies. His face went gray. You are telling me, he said slowly, we could lose access to the frameworks she built? No. I replied. You have already lost them. Access was time limited. The protocols activated at midnight Saturday. Victor looked like someone had called in his margin. Margaret just stared at the table like it might offer her an exit strategy. I will fix it, Victor muttered. I will call Treasury. We will push the wire through today. That would constitute retroactive coercion, I said evenly. Article 9.2b defines any compensation payment post-invocation as an attempt to reverse protective protocols under duress. That language is very precise. He turned to Margaret. This cannot be enforceable. She did not answer because she knew it was. Victor spent the rest of that meeting doing what overconfident executives do best, bluffing with the desperation of someone realizing the cards were not in his hand. First came denial dressed as concern. Then came delay wrapped in false charm and regulatory jargon. I have seen it before. Hell, I had lived it for the better part of 6 years at this firm. But this time, I was not the quiet analyst behind the models. I was the one holding the valuation keys. And Victor had just handed me the combination. It has got to be a clearing delay, he said, pacing now, as if movement might generate credibility. I will get Leonard on it. He has probably already flagged it. Would you like me to forward the documentation? I asked. Calm, no edge, just offering evidence like a witness offering testimony. Victor blinked. Documentation. I opened my attaché and slid a single printed sheet across the table. Transaction history from my bank, highlighted and annotated. Underneath it, stapled neatly, was an internal log from our own treasury system. Wire batch IDs, disbursement dates, amounts, and authorization chains, verified and time-stamped. I said, all performance bonuses for Q4 were issued as of the 19th per schedule. Mine was not. Margaret leaned in to examine the paperwork, her expression unreadable. Victor did not look. He just turned towards the door like perhaps there was an escape route behind the credenza. This does not make sense, he muttered. You are telling me the system skipped you? No, I said. I am telling you someone did. Silence. Margaret finally spoke. We need to verify these against Treasury records. Catherine, we appreciate your patience in the interim. I nodded once. Of course. To ensure proper documentation, I have submitted a formal invocation of Article 9.2 to HR. Timestamped, delivered via internal and external channels. Copy is attached to that same file. Victor's eyes widened slightly. He understood the implications. A verbal dispute is one thing. A formal invocation is a legal instrument in a bespoke suit. I think we are escalating prematurely. Priscilla from HR said later that afternoon, when she called me into her office, she had the strained tone of someone trying to plug a leak with press releases. There is probably just an administrative error. Maybe the approval got delayed. You know how Leonard's team operates during quarter end. I gave her a thin smile. Perhaps, but for a bonus of that magnitude, and considering how publicly it was announced, I thought I should be thorough. Well, she said, fidgeting with a branded paperweight shaped like a bull. We will investigate. Just give us some time. I have documented everything, I said, and I would prefer not to delay resolution. I assume the firm feels similarly. She did not respond, just nodded and gestured vaguely at her monitor like she had some form to complete, as if pretending to address it would purchase time. But here is what they failed to understand. My calm was not acquiescence. It was calculation. Because while legal delayed, HR deflected, and Victor paced like a portfolio manager watching a position crater, I was already 10 steps ahead. My records extended beyond compensation. I had built a comprehensive tracker for every deal, bonus allocation, and resource movement since I joined. Not because I distrusted them, but because I did. Trust them to forget. Trust them to protect each other. Trust them to redirect funds when they assumed no one was monitoring. Buried in those records, under an unremarkable column labeled Authorization Chain, was something I knew they had not anticipated, a pattern. 3 identical authorizations, 3 redirected payments, same coded memo, exec comp strategic allocation. One of them was mine. The other 2 went to partners who had not closed a single deal that quarter. Ghost bonuses. I did not mention it yet. Timing was everything. Let the irregularities surface organically, like they always do. That afternoon, I returned to my desk and opened the encrypted drive where I maintained my audit files. I flagged 3 entries. Added a red notation to the one labeled Q4 variance, flagged transactions, 80,000. Then I made a single entry in my personal log. Delay tactics confirmed, legal fragmented, HR deflecting, audit escalation, 48-hour countdown. Then I did something Victor would never have anticipated. I made myself a cup of tea, logged out of Bloomberg, and departed at precisely 5:01 p.m. because I did not need to pursue anyone. I had already filed the motion. All they had to do was keep dissembling long enough for it to detonate everything around them. By Tuesday morning, the office smelled like concealed panic, not just the usual aroma of overpriced espresso and reheated takeout from the analyst bullpen, but something acrid, like balance sheets left exposed too long. No one knew what was happening precisely, but everyone sensed something was. Victor stopped his usual victory laps through the trading floor. Margaret stopped her practiced smiles. Leonard from Treasury suddenly developed a preference for taking all calls in the stairwell. Even Priscilla from HR, who typically announced Happy Tuesday like it was a company holiday, was anchored to her inbox, AirPod inserted, nodding frantically at whatever crisis call she was pretending to manage. I said little. I did not need to. While they scrambled to reconcile discrepancies, I was already deep into what I now considered Phase 2. The quiet audit. For the past 4 years, I had maintained a secondary system, not firm-sanctioned, not cloud-synced, an encrypted, air-gapped external drive I privately referred to as my insurance fund. Not because I was paranoid, because I was experienced. I had observed too many colleagues blamed for allocation errors that were not theirs. Watched senior analysts gaslit into silence over compensation mistakes that somehow always benefited people with corner offices. My system tracked more than bonuses, it tracked patterns, financial, procedural, personnel-related. Every client payment processed. I captured the metadata. Every bonus authorized. I documented the approval chain. Every hire, every departure, every email with an unusual BCC. I recorded it. The file architecture was deliberately mundane, organized by quarter and initiative. But once opened, it revealed the infrastructure of a deeply compromised institution. And now, examining Q4 records, I discovered exactly what I had feared. 3 executive bonuses, all authorized on identical dates, all coded under reallocated partnership discretionary funds, all sourced from pools that had reported unclaimed analyst incentives. The figures matched the missing disbursements. Mine included. One of them, I recalled, had been publicly declined due to deal delays. Another partner had not even submitted his quarterly performance documentation. Yet there was his $95,000 bonus, neatly approved, signed by Victor. Memo line, strategic retention. Strategic embezzlement was more accurate. And there was something else. A name I did not recognize. A payment-coded consulting fee to an advisor named R. Pemberton. No employee record. No tax documentation. No client engagement letter. Just a wire transfer to an offshore account and a notation buried in Treasury under advisory services. Confidential. I checked our consultant registry. No Pemberton. I checked accounts payable. Nothing. Then I checked our onboarding and termination files. That is when my stomach tightened. We had a template for creating placeholder vendor accounts, used when establishing provisional billing codes for new client relationships. Normally, these were temporary, monitored, and automatically expired. But someone had duplicated that template and used it to fabricate an entire vendor profile, sufficient to justify a 6-figure advisory disbursement. The signature on the authorization, Leonard. Now, I am not a whistleblower by temperament. I do not derive satisfaction from professional destruction. But I do believe in accurate accounting. Watching these executives loot our firm like a private equity target while gaslighting me over $80,000 in earned compensation, that was my threshold. I did not need media exposure. I did not need a scandal on financial Twitter. I just needed to pull one very specific thread. At 3:47 p.m., I used my personal laptop in a cafe across town, behind a VPN with a freshly created encrypted Proton Mail account. I composed a brief, clinical message to the board's audit committee. Subject: possible unauthorized executive disbursements. Body 3. Q4 bonuses approved outside documented performance parameters. One linked to a fabricated vendor profile. All traceable via internal audit trail. Keywords: Pemberton, reallocated discretionary, advisory reallocation. No identification, no threats, no demands, just sufficient breadcrumbs to compel action. By the time I returned to the office, I could sense the atmospheric shift. Like a market correction building behind the trading screens, the correction had not materialized yet, but the indicators were turning red. Conversations halted when I passed. Bloomberg chats went conspicuously quiet. Victor encountered me in the corridor and produced a smile so forced it appeared manually constructed. Everything satisfactory. Catherine. Everything is in motion, I said. That evening, I duplicated my audit files, triple redundancy, stored one in a safety deposit box under my sister's name, mailed another to my attorney with a time-stamped letter marked "Do not open unless instructed." Retained the third in my apartment, unmarked, innocuous as a backup drive of family photographs, because circumstances were about to become volatile. And when they did, I intended to be the only one holding the hedge. By Thursday, the board had convened an emergency session. I learned this because Margaret inadvertently CC'd me on a calendar invitation before hastily removing it, but notifications cannot be undelivered. The meeting was scheduled for Friday afternoon. Closed session. Attendees full board, external counsel, forensic accountants, no executives, no HR, just the people with actual authority to order an investigation. I spent Thursday executing exactly what I always did: building models, reviewing deal structures, attending meetings with the composure of someone with nothing whatsoever to conceal. Victor avoided me entirely. Leonard reported illness. Priscilla kept passing my desk like she was searching for an excuse to stop, but could not locate one. Friday morning, I received a calendar invitation from Richard Hartwell, board chairman. Meeting request. Confidential discussion. Location, executive boardroom. Time, 2 p.m., no subject line, no agenda, just my name and the implication that everything was about to change. I accepted immediately. The boardroom was engineered for intimidation, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline, a conference table carved from a single piece of walnut that probably cost more than my first year's salary. The kind of space where careers are launched or liquidated, depending on which side of the table you occupy. When I entered, the atmosphere was dense enough to price as an illiquid asset. Victor was seated at the far end, looking like someone had marked his entire portfolio to market at zero. His characteristic confidence had evaporated. The man who commanded rooms like a sovereign wealth fund presentation was now hunched forward, fingers drumming anxiously on the mahogany. Leonard sat beside him, perspiring visibly through his bespoke shirt. His eyes moved around the room like a trader watching a position gap down at open. He knew. He knew that I knew. And now the board knew. Margaret wore her litigation expression, which indicated she had already calculated every potential liability and was mentally updating her professional indemnity coverage. Priscilla from HR was conspicuously absent. No one mentioned why. No one needed to. But the real authority in the room had shifted. Richard Hartwell sat at the head of the table. 72 years old, silver-haired, with the measured precision of someone who had survived 4 market crashes, 2 regulatory investigations, and 1 very public hostile takeover attempt. He had built this firm before Victor knew what a DCF was. He had cultivated the institutional investors who were now extremely interested in understanding where their capital had been allocated. He had witnessed everything. And based on his expression, he was profoundly displeased with what he was witnessing now. Beside him sat an external investigator I did not recognize, a woman in her 50s with penetrating eyes and a stack of folders suggesting she had spent the last 72 hours discovering things no one wanted discovered. Her credentials indicated Morrison and Associates, forensic accounting, forensic. The word hung in the air like a pending enforcement action. "Miss Aldridge," Richard said, "thank you for joining us." I nodded, sat down, placed my attaché on the table, waited. Let the silence perform its function. "We have been examining certain internal matters," he continued. His voice was measured, but carried the weight of someone who had already reached conclusions and was now merely executing them. "Your invocation of Article 9.2 raised certain questions that generated additional questions, and those questions led to Ms. Morrison here." I remained silent. Maintained eye contact. The external investigator opened her folder. "We have identified 3 executive disbursements that do not correspond with documented performance metrics," she said. Her voice was clinical, precise. The voice of someone who had delivered unwelcome news to boardrooms before and would again. The aggregate discrepancy is approximately $340,000. Victor produced a sound like a margin call notification. Furthermore, Morrison continued, "One disbursement appears connected to a vendor profile that exists in no verifiable system. No W-9 documentation, no engagement letter, no deliverables recorded. We are currently tracing the receiving account, but preliminary findings suggest connection to an entity with ties to firm leadership." She looked up from her folder and fixed her gaze directly on Leonard. Leonard appeared to be calculating exit velocities. "We are treating this as potential financial misconduct," Morrison concluded, "pending complete investigation." Victor opened his mouth to speak. Richard raised his hand. Victor closed his mouth. The hierarchy had realigned. The founder had reasserted control, and the executives who had been operating the firm like a personal fund were about to learn what accountability meant. "Miss Aldridge," Richard said, turning to me, "do you have any documentation that might assist this review?" I opened my attaché, slid the first page across the table. Transaction history from my personal account. Internal authorization logs extracted from our own systems. Screenshot of the Bloomberg chat where Leonard discussed deferring my compensation. Screenshot of the expense report for the Aspen retreat my bonus apparently funded. Screenshot of Victor's wine charges from the same weekend. The room was silent as they examined the papers. Margaret leaned forward, her legal mind clearly racing through the implications. One of the board members, a woman I recognized from the audit committee, was shaking her head slowly. I have maintained comprehensive records since my first year, I said, for tax planning purposes. Initially, then for pattern analysis, I identified irregularities approximately 18 months ago, but elected to document rather than escalate. Why, Richard asked? His eyes were sharp, probing. The question of a founder, not a figurehead. Because I understood no one would believe me, I said, until the evidence was undeniable. Until the people who could actually act were compelled to examine it. I paused. I also understood that the people responsible were the same people I would be required to report to. HR reports to the C-suite. Legal represents the firm. The board only sees what management chooses to present. So I waited. I documented, and I constructed a case that could not be dismissed or rationalized. I did not need to become a whistleblower. I just needed to ring a bell and wait for everyone to hear it. The audit committee member spoke up. Miss Aldridge, are you suggesting you suspected fraud for over a year and chose not to report it through official channels? I am suggesting I suspected discrepancies, I replied, and I reported them through the most effective channel available to me, my contract. Article 9.2 exists precisely because I anticipated this scenario. I drafted a clause that would compel transparency if I was ever denied what I had earned. I did not need to file a complaint. I just needed to trigger an audit. And that is exactly what happened. Silence stretched across the room. Leonard was staring at the table like it might offer him sanctuary. Victor was gripping his pen so tightly I thought it might snap. Morrison, the forensic accountant, spoke again. For the record, the Pemberton account received 7 separate disbursements over the past 3 years. Total value, $642,000. All coded as advisory services. All approved by Mr. Leonard Ashworth. Leonard made a sound that was halfway between a cough and a sob. Additionally, Morrison continued, we have identified a pattern of bonus reallocations that diverted approximately $400,000 from analyst and associate compensation pools to executive discretionary accounts over the same period. She looked directly at Victor. All authorized by Mr. Victor Ashford. Victor stood up abruptly. This is absurd. These are standard compensation adjustments. Every firm makes discretionary reallocations. This is how the industry operates. Richard raised his hand again. Sit down. Victor. Victor remained standing. Richard. You cannot seriously believe that I would, I said, sit down. The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. Victor sat. Richard turned back to me. Miss Aldridge, what are your terms? I opened the second section of my attaché and removed a typed document. Slid it across the table. Restitution. Full bonus plus penalties per Article 9.2b. Licensing fees for the valuation methodologies I developed. Retroactive to date of breach. Formal correction of all internal records. Written acknowledgement of firm error. Termination of Victor Ashford and disqualification of Leonard Ashworth from future executive positions. External HR review conducted by independent counsel. And Richard asked, I met his eyes, I am not staying. That statement rippled through the room harder than anything else. Shock, disbelief, a faint note of something that might have been regret. I do not want a partnership, I said. I do not want a corner office or a ceremonial apology at the next investor dinner. I built this firm's analytical foundation while Victor collected accolades and Leonard collected kickbacks. You allowed it to happen. Now you are bearing the cost. I gathered my attaché, clicked the latch shut. You will receive everything owed: documentation, access codes, all operational methodologies. Once terms are met and confirmed by counsel, until then, your valuation frameworks remain restricted under protection. A silence stretched so long it bordered on surreal. Richard finally spoke. You could destroy us with this. No, I said. You already initiated that process. I am simply not allowing anyone to profit from the wreckage. And just before I stood to leave, I gave them the final piece. Oh, and one more thing. I leaned in slightly. You have been positioning for a fund launch. I know. I have seen the offering memorandum drafts. If my intellectual property claim is not resolved before the PPM is filed, your prospective LPs will discover unresolved IP disputes and material operational risk in their due diligence. A beat, I walk, and your fund launch walks with me. No one stopped me as I departed. They could not, because I did not burn the bridge. I converted it to a toll road, and I am the only one with the collection authority. The settlement arrived 12 days later. Full compensation. $80,000 bonus plus $28,000 in penalties per Article 9.2b. Licensing fees for the valuation methodologies I developed. Retroactive to date of breach. Another $45,000. Formal correction of internal records. Written acknowledgement that the disbursement failure was firm error, not employee oversight. And a clause confirming that all documentation in my possession would remain my property, to be utilized at my discretion. The total package exceeded $170,000, more than double what they had attempted to steal from me. The mathematics were poetic in their precision. Victor resigned within 6 weeks. The board accepted it with a press release that deployed the phrase "pursuing new opportunities" approximately 5 times and referenced his contributions to firm growth 0 times. His LinkedIn updated to strategic advisor and board member within the week. The kind of designations people assign themselves when no one else will extend an offer. I heard he attempted to raise a fund 3 months later. The deck made it to exactly 2 institutional investors before someone recognized the name and connected the events. Last I heard, he was consulting for a family office in Connecticut, which is finance speak for unemployed, but still maintaining country club membership. Leonard was terminated for cause after the investigation revealed the full scope of the vendor fraud scheme, the Pemberton account traced to a shell company he had established 4 years ago. Over $600,000 had been channeled through it, disguised as consulting fees and strategic advisory services. Criminal referral was recommended within 90 days. The case is still progressing through the legal system, but the forensic accountants discovered sufficient evidence to recommend prosecution. His wife filed for divorce the same week the charges were announced. I derive no satisfaction from that particular development, but I do not lose sleep over it either. Priscilla from HR was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The investigation determined she had been aware of compensation irregularities for at least 14 months and had actively participated in deflecting inquiries. Her separation agreement included confidentiality provisions that probably cost the firm another $75,000. She launched a podcast about authentic leadership and workplace culture. I listened to one episode. It was primarily advertisements for executive coaching services and meditation applications. The comments were disabled. Margaret, the general counsel, retained her position, but she was reassigned to a different practice area and no longer handles executive compensation matters. Richard told me privately that she had advocated for paying me immediately when the clause was first invoked. Victor had overruled her. I respected her somewhat more after learning that. I did not stay. Richard offered me a partnership track, managing director title, carried interest in the next fund, board observer seat with full information rights. The kind of package they offer when they are terrified you might write a tell-all or establish a competing practice. I declined. I do not want a corner office. I told him. I do not want a title or a ceremonial apology at the next partner's dinner. I do not want to sit in meetings with people who observed this happening and did nothing until they were compelled to. I constructed this firm's analytical foundation while Victor collected accolades and Leonard collected kickbacks. You allowed it to happen. Now you are bearing the cost. Richard nodded slowly. He understood. He was a founder, after all. He knew what it felt like to watch something you built get hollowed out by people who viewed it as nothing more than a vehicle for personal enrichment. What will you do? He asked. I smiled. The same thing I have always done, I said. Build models, document everything, and never let anyone forget that the quiet ones are usually the ones running the actual analysis. I claimed the settlement, claimed my documentation, claimed my air-gapped drive containing everything they never wanted, audited. And I departed that building for the final time. Past the trading floor I had spent 6 years supporting, past the conference rooms where I had presented 100 pitch books, past the motivational artwork about excellence and integrity that had always felt like it was purchased for someone else's benefit. The security guard nodded at me as I left. He had been there since my first day. He understood what had transpired. Everyone understood. Good luck out there, he said. I will not require it. I replied, I have documentation. 4 months later, I established my own advisory practice, retained by 3 of our former competitors to audit their internal compensation systems. They wanted someone who understood where bodies were typically buried in firms like theirs. The irony was not lost on me. Neither was my hourly rate. I earn more in a month now than I previously earned in a quarter. I determine my own schedule. I select my own clients. I answer to no one except the IRS and my own standards. I purchased a new apartment, quiet building, excellent views, doorman who remembers my name. I named my home office the Audit Room. It felt appropriate, sometimes. When I am reviewing financials late at night, I think about that celebration dinner, the vintage champagne and the pretentious jazz quartet, Victor raising his glass to me like I should have been grateful for the recognition, like being publicly celebrated for compensation I never received was some form of gift. I think about what it felt like to be invisible, to be the quiet one who structured everything and received nothing, to observe credit flow upward while actual work flowed down, to watch partners receive standing ovations for deals I had modeled while they mispronounced the terminology in their client pitches. And then I remember those 5 words. I never received it. 5 words that exposed a system designed to reward the loudest voices while silencing those who performed the actual analysis. 5 words that cost them a managing director, a CFO, a fund launch timeline, and approximately $8 million in legal fees and settlement costs. Competence is expensive, theft is catastrophic, and revenge. Revenge is just proper documentation. Big thanks for watching, you magnificent contrarians. Subscribe to keep the audits rolling, and remember, read your contracts, archive your receipts, and never underestimate the quiet ones. They are usually the ones who built the models everyone else depends on.